My guest today is a personal hero I have read. His book, Free to Learn, is one of my all-time favorite books. He is my favorite play researcher. He talks about autonomy in kids. So much of my work has been inspired by him. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Peter Gray.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to be here, John.
So you talk about a lot of things. I want to get to your new book soon, but before we get to that, a lot of what has been the podcast recently and the social media platform recently is conversations about schools. I know that you are in many ways an advocate for homeschool or even unschooling, free schooling, alternative models of schools. I wanted to challenge at the beginning, right off the bat, ask you a tough one. If we are stuck in some ways with the system that we have right now, we can't make massive changes. I know that you are not typically an incrementalist, but is there a small change that you would have schools make that could produce a disproportionately large increase in child autonomy, which is so much of what you talk about?
So what the research shows is that the one thing that seems to make a difference in terms of the effect of schooling on children's mental health, as well as even academic performance within school, is what we call school climate. This refers to the degree to which the kids at the school feel at home there. They feel that they're cared for, that they're respected by the teachers and everybody there, regardless of how they're doing academically, that people know who they are, that people know who they are as individuals, that we're all kind of on the same team here to help one another. I looked at one point I was really interested in what can schools do to reduce the so-called education gap between the performance of wealthier and wealthier kids and kids who come from low-income families. This is a gap that is always talked about, and so far everything that's been done to try to reduce that gap seems to increase the gap. But the one thing that the research has shown is that when you take steps to make everybody feel comfortable, make everybody feel like their voices are heard, that they count, that they actually have a role in deciding what happens at the school, and people care about that. And usually when this is done, it's the principal who leads it. The principal has to set the tone for it by interacting in a very respectable way with the teachers and encouraging the teachers to interact in a very respectable way. The kind of school where the principal greets the kids as they come in the door and by name. You know, how's your mom doing? I heard she's been under the weather a bit lately. I hope she's doing better. You know, that kind of thing that says I really know you and care about you. That makes a world of difference, and not only reducing the education gap, but increasing everybody's good feelings about school and reducing the degree to which people feel pressured. So that's one thing I would say about it. The other thing I can say is I've actually been involved through the Alliance, through the Let Grow Foundation, along with Lenore Skenazy and others, in working with schools to make changes. There's two interventions we have pushed that have been very successful in the schools that have done it. One is what the schools call Play Club, which is an hour or more of free age-mixed play, if it's elementary schools, all the grades together, either before school or after school, where there's no rules except that you need to stay within the confines of the campus and school building, and you can't deliberately hurt somebody else. And the monitors are instructed not to intervene unless there's a real emergency. There are now hundreds of schools doing this, and the kids love it. And the teachers who monitor Play Club and really hold back and let the kids solve the problem are developing by their own reports, better attitudes about the kids. They see brilliance on the playground that they didn't previously see in the classroom, and they kind of now have a new respect for the kids, and it affects how they're interacting with them in the classroom. So that's one thing we've done, and then we've also introduced another little exercise in school, which teachers are free to adopt or not adopt, which is what we call the Let Grow experience, which is basically an assignment the teacher makes to the students to do something outside of school independently. In other words, without a parent helping them or monitoring them, that they've never done before. And so they have to come up with things that they want to do, but then the teacher says, but of course you have to get your parents' permission for this. So the kid goes home and says, well, you know what I'd like to do, I've got this school assignment. Well, of course, the genius of this is the parent has to take it seriously because it's a school assignment, right? So the kids might say, and this is sort of one typical example, I for my Let Grow project, I would like to ride my bicycle all by myself to my friend's house 2 blocks away. This might be a 10-year-old girl. And she's never been allowed to do that before. And so they have a discussion. The teacher has also said you may need to negotiate with your parent if your parent won't let you do the thing that you most want to do. So the mother might say no, and then there's some discussion, and then finally the daughter says, well, how about if I just ride my bicycle around the block, and you can sit on the stoop and watch me go around the corner and watch me come around the other corner. So the mother agrees to that. And then the daughter does that, and what happens, and Lenore, my colleague Lenore Skenazy, has observed this directly because she's been present in some of these cases. Not only is the daughter beaming with pride that she did this thing, and it has this glow of, being more powerful than she was before she left, but the mother is also beaming with pride that the daughter did this and seeing the glow on her daughter's face. So next week, the mom is probably more likely to let the daughter do what she wanted to do in the first place. So this is, it's done through the school, but it breaks into this cycle of fear by producing a different kind of cycle, a cycle of pride in the parents' the parents' pride in what her daughter is capable of doing, and pride in herself, the mom, for allowing the daughter to do this. So these are a couple things we've done in school. When I talk to school administrators, and I often am invited to talk to educators, and I say, so what are the main things that could be done to make school a better place? I talk about what I just said, but I say that the best thing you could do, the best thing you could do is, instead of continuously doing more at school, start doing less. Instead of increasing the number of school days, decrease them. Instead of increasing homework, decrease it. All we're doing with all of this is burning kids out. There's no evidence whatsoever that making kids sit in their seats for longer hours, giving them more hours of homework, that this is in any way improving even their academic learning, let alone other aspects of their life where it's interfering with other aspects of their life. There's no evidence that kids are learning more today than they were learning in elementary school. When I was in elementary school decades ago, when the school year was 5 weeks shorter than it is today, and when we had 2 hours outdoor play and a 6-hour school day, there's no evidence that taking all that extra time to make kids sit in their seats doing worksheets and making them carry books and worksheets between home and school, there's zero evidence that this is improving academic education. So far, nobody's posed an argument against that.
Yeah. That when I'm asked similar questions, and I'm drawing a lot on your work, I'm also drawing on people like Alfie Kohn, who talks about intrinsic motivation and all of these, internal drive for learning. When I am asked that same question, my initial reaction is actually more like that third one. I love the other options that you gave. Mine is always just ban homework. Like the thing that I've seen anecdotally, and I understand anecdotes are not often the way in which we should always make our decisions, but anecdotally I've seen we have kids who live next door to us, and their parents are not from the United States, and so they're much more likely to let their kids play outside for hours at a time unsupervised with my kids, who are being raised in this kind of more free way, a free autonomous way. And what I found is that the kids next door this year seem to have far less homework just because of their teachers. And one of them specifically has significantly less homework than he had in second grade, now that he's in third grade. And not only the social emotional changes, but actually the cognitive changes in this child. It's like the more homework that he did, the more dysregulated, the more uncomfortable, the more time that this kid, who probably could be diagnosed with something, like if you really wanted to put him through the ringer, you could find something, but you could find some initials that that could describe some of his behaviors. But really what he has experienced is the more free and independent playtime that he has, the better he seems to do in every sense of the word. And so I love that as an alternative. Do you think that there is a chance of making these changes on a wide scale, or is the current system that we have beyond reform, in your view?
So the problem is, so I am mentally split. I literally wear two different hats. One is my Alliance for Self-Directed Education hat, which encourages people to leave the school system and says that the school system is really incapable of reform of the kind that would really free children to use their natural ways of learning and free them from all the pressure and problems of course schooling. The public school system is incapable of reforming in that kind of way. What has happened ever since we have had compulsory school, we have had swings in thinking within the system. There were progressive movements within the school system, within the public school system in the 1920s and into the 30s, the Dewey era, where we made a lot of the changes that you and I are just talking about, where schools made those changes, but then at some point there was reaction against it. And you had books like Why Johnny Can't Read, and they were blaming progressive educators for this. And then we went sort of after the war, after the Second World War, we went into a more rigid stage of schooling. And then beginning in sort of the 1960s into the 70s, the sort of hippie era, if we think of it as that, things loosened up a little bit. We began to have what were called open-door classrooms. We began to have more flexibility a little bit. And then in the 1980s, in the Reagan administration, we had this book that came out, created by a commission appointed by Reagan, almost none of whom knew anything about child development, but came from the business world, who said we've got to make schooling rigorous because we're going to fall behind the Chinese, who are scoring so much higher than us on these academic tests. So then we went into No Child Left Behind, and everything about progressive education was left in the wayside. So we go back and forth. I think the fundamental problem is this. The fundamental problem, and I don't see any way that that the school system as we know it can deal with it, is the belief that education can be measured. It can't be measured. It just can't be measured. Any attempt to measure it destroys children's autonomy in how they learn, destroys the differences, wipes away the differences. So let's say we all agree that learning how to read is a valuable skill. Learning how to read is a valuable skill in our culture. A lot depends upon reading. But does everybody need to learn how to read when they're 6 years old or 7 years old? No, of course not. So how are you going to have a school if you admit that, where
Sure.
you're giving people tests? So, so you get then books like Why Johnny Can't Read, because the progressive system wasn't pushing Johnny to read when he was 6 years old. You know,
Right.
he was going to he was a perfectly fine reader when he was 11 or 12, but that didn't satisfy the testing. So as long as you have testing, every time you move to something more a sort of more liberal approach within the school system, you find that by certain measures the scores go down. Kids are learning maybe more, but they're not learning more of the particular thing they're being tested on at that time in their development. So as long as you're going to have a system where the system is supposed to be accountable for the children's education, and the accountability is supposed to be measurable in some kind of quantitative terms, you can't have real reform. You can do the kinds of things we were talking about before, which frees children up for more opportunity for real learning outside of school by making school less encompassing of all their life. We need to free children up. I mean, when I was in school in the 1950s, school kind of ran the same way, but as I said, we had much less of it. So we had much more time for real self-directed learning and education, learning who I am, learning what I love to do, becoming good at what I love to do, learning how to make friends and keep friends. All of these things that are so much more important than the kinds of academic lessons being taught in school. I had plenty of time to do that, even though we had compulsory school. But today we're not giving kids enough time to do that.
You know, in all of our conversations about self-directed education, I couldn't agree more with what you're saying and all of what testing does and all of these impacts. And maybe school wouldn't be so detrimental if we just had less of it. That feels to me like a reform that could happen. If we are not going to get rid of compulsory schooling, then at least we could lessen the burden on parents in the same way that, like, you know, we can make other reforms that way. I think in the modern world, and I don't know how much you talk about this, but I don't know in the modern world how we contend with things like AI. You know, is there an argument that AI is going to, in your view, improve self-directed learning because, you know, kids can just kind of it's at their fingertips. The answer is right there. They can, if they're curious about something, they can just type it into ChatGPT or Claude and get an answer back. Or is this really just going to lead us to a new type of dependency because so much of the play-based learning is hard-won learning, but won in a way that they enjoyed. Now we are replacing the classroom maybe with the algorithm, whatever that is. Do you feel that this is a benefit, or is this potentially like are we
I
coming
think
to the precipice?
there's no question but what. So let's forget AI for a moment. I'm just barely beginning. Nobody understands AI, and I certainly don't. I heard a talk from somebody who's supposedly at the AI lecture, and he started off with, "I don't understand it. Nobody understands it." You know,
I think that is sort of
we built
it's
this
sort of
thing,
the
and none
point.
of us understand how it works. You know,
Yeah,
so.
well, it's a black box. Like they just
So it's
they
a
put
black
it they
box.
put
Somehow
it
we've
in and
created this thing that gives us answers, that gives us, and many of the answers seem to be verifiable. Well, so let me back up a little bit. In general, the the smartphone that everybody wants to ban, so many people, Jonathan Haidt and others, think kids shouldn't have until they're a certain age, is without question the most powerful educational tool that has ever been devised. It should have totally reformed how we think about education. Kids who are in self-directed education know that the convenience of the smartphone is you can carry it wherever you want, and whenever you've got a question or you want to know something, you can at least get a start to a good answer to that. In some places, a very good answer to it. So that's the convenience of it. But the internet in general should have totally reformed how we do education. It has changed entirely what people need to learn. You don't need to memorize stuff because you've got the answers to all that stuff you had memorized right there on your fingertips. It changes entirely. What you need now is to be able to think creatively and to think, you need to be able to think critically. You need to be able to have those kinds of skills to make judgments. You don't need to memorize stuff, nor do you need to know how to do routine calculations. You do need to know when you might do such a calculation and why you might do it and why it works and so on and so on. But you don't need to know how to do it. You've got things to do it. The jobs out there are not looking for people who can do calculations. They're not looking for people who can do what robots can do. They're looking for people that can do those things that, at least today, we don't have machines doing it. And those are the things that children develop naturally when they're playing, exploring, thinking about things, talking with one another. So the thing that intrigues me about AI, and I haven't done the research to be able to give you any kind of an authoritative answer to this, but I read the other day that there's this experimental school where they use AI for the basic academic instruction. And what they're finding is that in 2 hours a day with AI, the kids can learn everything that is on the syllabus, everything, easily in 2 hours. So if we believe it's important to learn that stuff, wouldn't it be great if everybody could just spend 2 hours a day doing that and then the rest of their day doing more interesting things that they want to do? So if we believe it's important to learn that core curriculum, and if it can be learned in 2 hours, I absolutely believe it can be learned in 2 hours. I have no question what it can.
Or less.
I think some people discovered, or less, some people discovered that during COVID. They found, we did a little survey of kids during COVID and about what they thought about the online learning, and they said, well, one thing I discovered is I could do the whole curriculum in less than 2 hours, and then I can spend the rest of the day doing what I want to do. We're wasting kids' time in school. We're just wasting as if their time doesn't matter. We're just wasting it. They're spending a lot of time in stuff that has nothing to do with education, even in the narrow sense that it's defined by the school system.
Yeah, that's something that we have discovered actually in our own lives, where when we did have that period of time last year where the next door neighbor kids were doing between 60 and 90 minutes of homework a day,
right,
we realized that we were only doing between 60 and 90 minutes of instruction a day. So what I said to their parents was, I said, I think you should call the school and tell them no more homework. And they said, are you allowed to do that? They're not from the United States, and so they don't. And I said, that's a great question. But the answer is yes, you can call and say we're not doing homework in our family, and see what they say. See if they how hard they push back. And they said, well, why shouldn't they have to do an hour of homework or an hour and a half of homework? Why shouldn't they? And I said, because it means that the 6 hours that they're in school or 7 hours that they're in school was pointless. Because my kid, you are teaching your kid one-on-one for 60 to 90 minutes, and the teacher is saying, and that is essential in order for them to learn. But I'm teaching my kid everything that your kid knows in 60 to 90 minutes without 7 hours of their day being taken up at school. So there's really, you tell me what they did for 7 hours if they need the 60 to 90 minutes at the end of the day to actually learn it. And by the way, you're doing it at the worst developmental time of the day, right? They're exhausted, they're hungry, they're burned out, and now you're going to teach them basic math. Whereas, I teach my kids the second that of the day that makes most sense for them, and it's really this is the basis of my first book, which was not about education, but it was about discipline. So it is about education, right? Everything is about education in its core, and the basis of my book was when you teach a kid the lesson at the right time. When you teach a kid a lesson punitively in the moment of dysregulation, they don't learn it. But if you teach that same lesson 20, 30 minutes later through a conversation, they internalize it. So either you can repeat yourself 500 times during the meltdown, or you can tell them 5 or 10 times after the fact, and you can achieve the same result. Whether you want to do it 500 times or 10 times, that's your business. But that's really what school is kind of doing. Hey, we're going to just do it we're going to opt for the 500, where we probably just needed to do it more in a targeted way. I want to take a quick break before we get to your book, because you have a book coming out, and I want my listeners to hear about it. But I just need to take a quick break for we don't have a sponsor, but so that we can hear me do a sponsorship ad for myself. I want to take a quick pause to interrupt myself and tell you about the best resource, the number one way that you can be parenting better. And it is what I call the Parent Lab. It's an online community that I run, and it is basically the place where you can get everything, one-stop shop related to whole parent. It is for those moments in your life where you're doing everything to stay calm and you feel like parenting is so overwhelming and your kid is screaming and you just feel like, man, I am getting triggered more and more every single day by these kids or this individual kid. And I just don't know what to do. Like, the social media advice seems good in the moment. The podcast episodes seem good in the moment. The parenting books seem good, but this keeps happening. Why does none of this stuff work in real life? That is exactly why I created the Parent Lab. It's basically the place that you can go whenever parenting gets hard, no matter what you're going through, because you probably don't need more judgment and you don't need more people trying to tell you all the things you're doing wrong. What you need is a plan. You need the actual words that you can say in the actual moments, and support from somebody who understands the child development side, that's me, and who also understands what it is like to parent real kids in real life. So what is inside the Parent Lab? Well, you get instant access to our full course library, which includes courses on siblings, like multiple courses on siblings, including the brand new 21-day sibling challenge, which is the most excited that I've been about a course in a very long time, as well as courses on kind of more common things: bedtime battles, potty training, tantrums, strong-willed kids, highly sensitive kids. I have workshops and courses on all of these things, how to stop yelling at your kids. I even have one on how to get your partner on board, which is great not only if you're struggling to get your partner on board, but also if you're struggling to get maybe an in-law or somebody else in your child-giving circle, in your village, on board. And you also get live coaching calls with me. And I don't mean like some giant webinar where you're going to get lost in the chat and they say, oh, I'm going to be there, but actually you're never going to get your question answered. We're talking like small group, small knit community where you can bring your actual situation, no matter what you're going through with your kid, what your struggle is in that moment, and we will work through it together live. You also get DM access to me, so I can answer your questions on those coaching calls, even if you can't be there in person, or I can just respond in DMs. And honestly, my favorite part is connecting with parents. So this is not a bunch of theory. It's not fluff. It is literally like, say this when your kid refuses to leave the park. Do this when your siblings start to hit each other. Do this during bedtime. Do this when you have a struggle with potty training. And parents are constantly telling me, I tried this stuff the same day and it completely changed the interaction. You can get in right now and check out the entire Parent Lab. It is open for enrollment. Come in, watch a few videos, bring your hardest parenting challenge to me and see if it helps. And if not, you can cancel at any time, no judgment. Because parenting is hard enough. You shouldn't have to figure it out on your own. So head over to Parent Lab, to the link below, and let's get started transforming your parenting. I'm back with Dr. Peter Gray. We are talking about education. We're talking about society. We're talking about AI. We're talking about all of these different things. But I want to bring the topic to your book. You have a new book coming out in September. And when I read the press kit for that book, I've not read the book yet, I was startled that in many ways you are taking aim at one of the kind of best-selling, most popular books, the central thesis of the book, The Anxious Generation, which says that technology is what's leading to the rise in anxiety among children and teens. But you don't think so. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, first of all, let me say that it's not just me who doesn't think so. I would say that essentially everybody who actually does research in this area, who actually has done research and done reviews of research, the meta-analyses of the research, that has to do with teens and technology and mental health, I have found nobody who actually is deep into that research who agrees with Jonathan Haidt's thesis. In fact, there's considerable anger among them that why is the world paying attention to this book? Jonathan Haidt is by no means an expert on this. He hired an assistant to do his research for him. He refers to maybe 20 studies in that book, cherry-picked studies, out of literally hundreds of studies that have been conducted. He doesn't even mention the fact that there are numerous review articles on these studies. There's numerous meta-analyses, all of which come to basically the same conclusion, which is that this technology can have both beneficial and negative influences on different individuals, that they tend to cancel one another out, that there's no evidence at all that there are negative effects that could possibly account for the large increase in anxiety, depression, and suicide that occurred between 2010 and 2018, which is the spike of increase in mental disorder that Jonathan Haidt is talking about. There's not even correlational evidence. There's no significant correlation between the amount of time a kid is spending on social media and their mental health. It just blanks out. There's essentially zero correlation. At best, sometimes people find a small correlation, and sometimes it's in the direction of better mental health for those who are on social media more, and sometimes it's in the other direction. But it's always small, and over studies, it cancels out. So even correlational, if there was a correlation, that wouldn't prove cause and effect. It wouldn't be too surprising if people who are anxious and depressed go on social media as a way of dealing with their anxiety and depression. And so the causation could be the opposite direction from what Jonathan Haidt talks about. To me, so the lack of correlation, but there's an even stronger argument than that. This increase that Jonathan Haidt is talking about in that book, the increase in anxiety, depression, suicide among teenagers between 2010 and 2018, is an American phenomenon. The internet is not an American phenomenon. It's a world phenomenon. Social media is a world phenomenon. This increase did not occur other places except in certain other places, and I'll tell you where it occurred and why it occurred in those other places. But if you look at the entire European Union, and I've done this, during this period where anxiety, depression, suicide was going like this, going up in America, it was going like this, down in Europe among teens. Why? Teens in Europe are not being deprived of social media. They're on social media just like our teens are. They're not being deprived of smartphones. They're on it just like our teens are. So why would it cause this terrible effect in America but not cause this terrible effect in all of Europe? There are other studies in the other areas where there's no correlation, there's no relationship between when social media became available and teens started using it and increases in mental disorder. So this is an American phenomenon. So we have to talk about something that happened in America but did not happen in the rest of the world. Jonathan Haidt does not acknowledge that. So I looked at are there other countries that have shown this such an increase similar to ours? And there are 2 or 3 other countries. One of them is the UK, or more specifically England, because this was something that happened in England. And another is Sweden. And believe it or not, Sweden also showed an increase. It was the one country in the European Union that showed an increase in anxiety, depression over approximately the same period that our teens did. What is similar between the United States, England, and Sweden? All of those places underwent government-enforced so-called reforms in schooling. For us, it was Common Core. In England, it was a national reform similar to our Common Core, and in Sweden, also a national reform similar to our Common Core. My argument is what happened here that didn't happen in most of the world, and what happened is we made a dramatic change for the worse in how we're doing schooling. School, which nobody wants to acknowledge this, because school has a halo around it. School has always been the biggest source of anxiety and depression for kids. Every single study that I've been able to find where kids are asked, what is the source of your anxiety and depression? Far and away the leading cause that they cite is school. Nothing else comes close. All the things that we want to say are stressing kids out are way down the list. This is true whether you're looking at younger children or whether you're looking at teenagers. We just don't want to acknowledge that. Every summer, the suicide rate among teenagers plummets. It goes way down. The rates of admissions to mental hospitals plummet every summer for pediatric admissions to psychiatric hospitals. It should be obvious that school is the biggest source of anxiety and depression for kids. And if we're going to change schools in a way to make it even more stressful, even give them less autonomy in school, make even the teachers stressed because they're all now worried about their being evaluated based on test scores, of course school is going to be more stressful than it was before, and of course we're going to see a spike in anxiety and depression. This should be obvious, but nobody wants to look at that. We bury our heads in the sand about this. We want to blame those evil social media companies. I don't want to defend the social media companies, but this is capitalism. This has been going on all the time. This is going to continue to go on. But this is not the cause of the increased rates of anxiety and depression. It clearly is not the cause.
So just to be, I want to just make sure that I'm understanding your point.
Right.
Your research has concluded that if there is an underlying cause, because we're seeing this only in places that have experienced the same types of educational reforms, the way in which we are doing school is what is causing the increased rates of suicidality, anxiety, depression among young people.
Right, exactly.
So who is, I don't want to, I come from a restorative perspective. I don't like blame, but who can we look to? Is this a teacher problem? Is this a parent problem? What's happening at home? The stress that parents are putting on kids these days? Is this an institutional problem at the national level, at the state level? Where can we, who are we writing letters to? Like if this is the underlying culprit.
Yeah. So Common Core is the end result of a chain of events initiated really way back in the Reagan administration that stemmed from the view that once we had international tests, the PISA tests, and American school children were performing more poorly on those tests than Chinese children were, and some of the other East Asian children were. So people in higher ups, certain people got upset by this, began to feel like we're being threatened. Reagan created a commission of people handpicked to come to a foregone conclusion, a conclusion that they already had before they ever got together. He knew what the conclusion was going to be, that our school system is too lax, unlike the Chinese system. And out of that came a book entitled A Nation at Risk. This was a big book. It was as if we are at risk, presumably in the competition with communist China, among other places, because our school children are not learning as much as those Chinese, according to the test. So that was the initial thing. So this led ultimately to federal legislation called No Child Left Behind, which led to some changes, but kind of mixed changes, and was somewhat vague what schools were supposed to do. But of course, the carrot that the government had, the federal government had, was money. So, we were already at the point where schools are kind of dependent on a certain amount of federal money, as well as state money going to the schools. And so there was this sort of threat that federal money is going to be held back if schools don't reform in such a way, and the state can't prove that the schools have reformed in such a way that test scores are going up. Now, this didn't have a lot of teeth initially. It had some, and it made some changes, made schools worse. But it was not until into the 21st century that that the teeth began to take effect in this. So it became more and more clear the federal government really was going to hold money back if schools couldn't prove. And so the result of that was that a lot of states, something like 43 or 44 states out of the whole set of states of the United States, created commissions who then met with one another to create what they called a Common Core. So this would be a Common Core across states. We will all do the same thing. We'll all have a Common Core. We'll have tests. We'll have Common Core tests at the end of the year, and this is what we'll use to prove ultimately to the federal government that we're improving academic learning because kids will be doing better on these tests.
As if it's not bad enough that we have taken 20 kids and assigned all of them to learn at the exact same pace. And now we take 200 students at the whole school to learn at the exact same pace. Well, 2,000 students in the school district learn at the exact same pace. Now we're taking kids from the entire country, essentially.
The entire country. And no matter what
background, no matter whether you're urban or rural or low income or high income, we erase all nuance and context, and we say all of you must learn at exactly age 6 this. All of you must learn at exactly age 8 this.
I think the worst thing that this did is it disempowered teachers. So teachers, of course, as you pointed out with the example of your neighbor, a lot depends on the teacher. Teachers are generally they're people who love kids. That's why they went into teaching. And many of them are very wise. Many of them are responsive to the kids. But basically what happened with Common Core is you now had administrators telling teachers they were not free to use their own judgment. They were not free to change the curriculum to fit the kids. They were not free to use their own wisdom. So teachers were dismissed as serious contributors to the educational process. Teachers now are just supposed to be the people conveying the curriculum that's already determined. And so teachers were disempowered. I'll tell you a quick story just to give an example of this. I have a half-sister, grew up in a different family from me, but we've been very close as adults, who has always not shared my radical views about education. She was teaching in middle school, very happily teaching for 22 years, loved the kids loved her. In 2010, as that school was gearing up for Common Core, suddenly there was an assistant principal circulating from class to class every day, coming into the class to make sure that every teacher was on the same page as every other teacher who was teaching that course.
On the same page? On the same exact page?
Literally on this, I don't know exactly how literally we mean, but at the same lesson, presumably the same, this is the lesson we do today. And she would be reprimanded. Now, the reason she was a good teacher, see, I think that even within the standard educational system, you can be a good teacher to the degree that you can engage the kids intellectually. If there's anything that promotes learning, it's intellectual engagement. Now, kids can engage themselves intellectually. They naturally do. But if you're in a class and you're studying some particular thing, the skilled teacher is the one who knows how to talk with the kids, draw out from them their thoughts and ideas, and get them intellectually engaged in whatever it is that you're talking about. That's the challenge of good teaching. You can't do that if you're following page by page a curriculum. So she might be on the particular day that the assistant administrator is coming in, she might be talking about this really interesting thing we were all talking about yesterday, and I've got some new ideas about it, and maybe you've got some new ideas. This is real education going on, right? But no, the assistant principal, who's younger than her, and this is my word, obviously stupider than her, is saying that what you've got to do is you've got to be teaching these things. These are the things that you've got to teach, and these are the test questions they've got to be able to answer at the end of what you're teaching now. So what happened with her, she tried to do it. She says she honestly tried to do what she was being told to do, and she got more and more depressed. She saw the kids were unhappy. She took a leave of absence for depression, and she said at the end of that, there's no way I can go back. No way I can go back to this. I'm not going to be in a school where I feel I'm doing more harm to the kids than good. And she resigned. She was not, if she could stick it out for 3 or 4 more years, she would be eligible for a full pension. But she said, I can't stick it out for that. I can't do it. I've heard from lots of other teachers the same story. The best teachers left because they were not being respected for who they are. They were being told, you're just a cog in this system that comes from higher up than you.
Yeah. And I think that's the nuance that I always want to add to this conversation is whenever I have criticisms of the school system, whenever I have criticisms of the curriculum systems that we're offering, those are fundamentally not criticisms of teachers.
Right.
Those are criticisms, and in fact, teachers are until recently, and I have also experienced that many of the best teachers have walked away to homeschool their own kids, and often in certain cases. Many of the best teachers were the ones who were able to go beyond the curriculum. In my own public school education, K through 12 public school education, which, by the way, I graduated in 2010 from high school, which surprises many of my listeners because I'm pretty young. But that means that I also I am in the target demographic in many ways that Jonathan was talking about in his book about the anxious generation. I was raised in that. I graduated in the year, like I overlapped. My whole college education was during the time that he's talking about. The teachers that I experienced and the positive experience that I had in public school education was when teachers put down the curriculum and said, let's go on this journey together. And as I've gone on to then get my master's degree and my PhD, I have found that the less curriculum is involved in the whatever discipline I'm working in, the higher my grades are. So if I am a very intellectually, I am individually intellectually stimulated. And much of this is that I had essentially a homeschool teacher who lived next door to me who was helping to raise me with my parents, but who inspired my curiosity, and if I ever had a question, dragged me to the library. But in many ways, it is interesting that in my own experience, the harder the academics have gotten, the better I've done. And it's not because I was, smarter. It was because I was not being taught the Common Core version of that. At risk of stirring the pot too much, you mentioned in the past, earlier in the conversation, all of these positive associations with Lenore Skenazy and how she's helped you in the school reform movement. Lenore Skenazy, for people who may not be aware, was a co-author effectively on The Anxious Generation. So how do you square that where you have this person who's really working with you a lot, but who also is deeply involved, wrote the foreword for, and then helped write the latter chapters of a book that you are now criticizing in many ways?
Yeah, this is a problem. Yeah. I feel awkward about this. I'm still a very good friend of Lenore. I was one of the founding members with her and with Jonathan Haidt of the Let Grow organization. I was on the board of directors with them. When The Anxious Generation came out, and I was very clear about why I believed that what Jonathan Haidt was presenting is the opposite of the Let Grow philosophy. He's talking there about children's brains not being capable of making reasonable decisions. Somehow he thinks they're capable of making reasonable decisions outdoors, but they're not capable online of doing it. And he even talks about they don't have mature enough brains. And this boils my blood when people do this. They used to do this about women. They used to do this about African Americans. Any group you want to discriminate against, you point to some brain difference as the reason for doing so. So I was angry about the book. I expressed my anger about the book. I expressed this to Jonathan Haidt. I said, there's no way I can support this before he published the book. He shared the manuscript, hoping I would endorse it, and I told him why I couldn't possibly. So Lenore, frankly, is caught in the middle between us. She likes both of us. She did write that. She, like most people who haven't delved into the research, which she hasn't, like most people, you know, you look around, you see all these kids looking down on their smartphones, just like you see adults looking down on their smartphones, and you think, well, that can't be good. You know, so you just think that can't be good. That must be inhibiting their real world interactions and so on and so forth. So you have this intuitive belief in that. Jonathan Haidt had that intuitive belief, and then he hired somebody to try to find some data that seemed to support that intuitive belief and wrote a book based on that. Lenore has never looked into the literature on it. You know, she tells me that when I talk to her, when I explain what I explained to you, she agrees with me. But then she still is not willing to say. She kind of justifies it one way or another, like it can't hurt for kids to get off of social media. And I think it can hurt. So we disagree on this. I still have a lot of respect for Lenore. We're still friends, and I still work for I still work for the Let Grow. I think that I've prevented Let Grow as an organization from putting on their website a sort of anti-technology message.
Sure.
Yeah.
So just to play devil's advocate for a moment,
Sure.
I think if there's ever a case where I find myself, I've been critical. In many ways, I find myself stuck in the middle on that book too. Not that I have any relationship with the people who wrote it, or you know, I reached out to interview Jonathan before the book came out, and I had heard an interview with him, and I said, you know, would you like to do this? And he said he had his assistant email back and say, no thanks. So I have no relationship whatsoever. But the thing that I will say is that I found myself stuck in the middle on that book because so much of the stuff that he's talking about with free and independent and autonomous play I agree with. And then he goes into technology stuff, which I had not delved into the research, but the research was not convincing to me as a person who understands how to research. So even though I hadn't gone through the process of trying to disprove it, I just said this does not You've presented two fundamental claims. Kids need more freedom and autonomy and time outside, to which I firmly agree. Right. Then your technology claims were not, in my view, very supported by any empirical data. The thing that I would play devil's advocate on is if I do see a fundamental harm in technology, it is an opportunity cost. Kids tend to spend so much time online, we have seen, that they don't spend as much time doing many of the things that you and I are advocating for. Freedom, group dynamic play, going to the park and playing with friends. And it is not that technology has to do that, but that technology stands a chance at being in the way of that. What would you say to that when there is a criticism of the opportunity cost?
So what people don't realize is that when you actually do the studies, the kids who are on social media and who have smartphones, controlling for other factors, are also out in the real world, have more real world friends than those who have been deprived of those things. This is the empirical observation. The reason that kids are not outdoors, playing with one another, bonding with one another, is because they're not allowed to be. they're on the smartphones and on social media more than they might want to be because that's the only way they can get together with their friends. This was shown some years ago in a study, in a study. I'm trying to think of the name. Last name is Boyd. A woman who did this initially as a doctoral dissertation, then wrote a book on it. She interviewed teenagers across the country about why they're on social media so much. And the answer is, as opposed to why aren't you just getting together in reality, in the physical world? And the answer she got over and over and over again is we would much prefer to get together in the physical world, but we can't. Either I'm not allowed outside, or my friend is not allowed outside, or our schedules are so busy that we can't find any opportunity. We're all being so plugged into so many adult-directed activities, you know. So we don't have the freedom to get together. To the degree that we do get together, we use our phones to make appointments to get together. You know, this is why kids who are on it are getting together in reality more than those who are not. So we had already stopped children. This is what Jonathan Haidt doesn't acknowledge. We had already largely prevented kids from playing independently of adults in the physical world. Teenagers in particular want and need to get together with one another without parents in their face. You know, that's part of being a teenager. Teenagers have always hung out together, but now we're not allowing them to do so. Even if parents are allowing them out, there's almost no place they can go anymore. They used to hang out in shopping malls. Now the shopping mall security guards are not allowing them there to hang out there, right? They're being driven
My local mall just banned all kids under the age of 18 unsupervised.
Yeah, and you know, imagine if they did that with any other demographic group. How would we feel about that? You
Absolutely.
know? So we are purely, as a society, discriminating against them. So they found this other way that they can get together, and now we want to take that away from them too? You know, this is cruel. This is absolutely cruel, how we're depriving teenagers. To believe that by taking those phones away and social media, that's somehow going to enable them to get outdoors and really play without adults in their face all the time? No, it's not going to solve that problem. That problem was already present before we had that technology.
What is your hope as we conclude? This is my last question for you for restoring childhood. If you can look forward into the future and a year after the book is published, what's your goal? Obviously, many of the conclusions, the ball has already started to roll on many of the things that you're trying to blow the whistle on. What do you want for this book?
So there's no way I can answer this in a minute or two, but let me say that the last and by far the largest chapter of the new book is about all of the things that we need to do to restore childhood, to restore normal childhood, which means a childhood where children are free to play and explore without adults controlling them all the time, where children can learn to be independent, can learn to solve their own problems, can learn how to get along with peers without adults managing them. This is what the purpose of childhood is, really. The purpose of juvenile period for all mammals is to learn how to become independent of parents, and we're not allowing children to do that. So in that chapter, I have sections on what parents can do, what schools can do, what the medical establishment can do, what libraries can do, what town city planners can do, what recreation committees in towns can do, all sorts of things that can be done to renew the possibility for children to get together with other children to play and explore without being managed by adults. And there's just a lot of things that all of us can do. At the very end of the book, I put a link to my website where there will be a page where I'll be asking readers to tell me what they're doing to help restore childhood at whatever level they're talking about, whether they're doing it as a parent, whether they're doing it as a teacher, whether they're doing it as a librarian, a town planner, whatever. What are you doing to make it more possible for children to be free to do what children are biologically designed to do?
I love that. I love it. What can we do? For those looking to find more, what is your website? Where can we get in touch with you? Tell us about your Substack before we are out of time.
It's easy to find my website, just petergray.org. And I do a Substack called Play Makes Us Human, and you can easily find that. You can just Google Play Makes Us Human. I've got by now about 140 letters on that I call them, which are essays kind of on all of the themes that we've been talking about here, plus many more. So I welcome people to come to that.
Awesome. Links to those will be down below in the show notes or description, depending on whether you're watching or listening to this, as well as a link to pre-order Restoring Childhood. Thank you so much for being on the Whole Parent Podcast.
Thank you, John. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks again for listening to this episode of the Whole Parent Podcast. I hope it was worth the time that you gave it today. I hope you learned something or were challenged, or maybe it just made you smile. If it did, there's a couple of things that you can do that would really, really help me out. The first one is to go right now and subscribe to my channel at Whole Parent on YouTube. YouTube is getting full, unabridged versions of every podcast episode ad-free right now. I am really trying to get people over there because I have so much awesome YouTube content planned, and I have such a small following over there. So if you want to get the best of Whole Parent, hop over to the YouTube. There's awesome stuff there. It's going to absolutely change your life. The second thing that you can do is actually go to the link in the description. You can find YouTube there as well, but find the link for the Parent Lab. It's my exclusive community where I do group coaching. I have a whole course library there full of amazing educational resources for parents. It is a subscription model where you gain access for a low monthly fee. Go ahead, check out the Parent Lab. There's so many amazing things in the Parent Lab, and if you want to grow in your parenting, it's the best way to do that. The third thing that you can do, and it probably costs you the most because it costs you vulnerability, is to share this episode or this podcast in general with people in your life. There are parents in your life who are struggling. There are parents in your life who could use this in their life, and we know that the number one way that we can get more people to listen and watch and follow along with the podcast is by personal referral. People want to know what you're listening to. They want to know what's helping you to parent more effectively. And so if you can do that, find somebody in your life who needs this podcast and send it to them. I would be so appreciative. Thank you again so much for your time. You can find links to everything that we talked about in the episode, including my books, Punishment Free Parenting and Set My Feelings Free, down below. And I'll see you next time.